we have Keighron and Ryan Lynch, who are two of the NStEP student trainer team, and they're going to reflect on a year of highly successful NStEP training, delivery at a time of unprecedented upheaval for student representatives. Cameron is a PhD student in physiology at NUI Galway. They've been a class representative at both undergraduate and postgraduate level, a part-time officer with responsibility for taught postgraduate students, and last year they were the vice president and education officer in NUI Galway Students' Union. And Ryan is a student at Maynooth University, currently studying computer science and software engineering. He has been an academic representative for a number of years, and he's also been very active in mental health awareness and promoting access to higher education through a range of projects, including clubs and societies. So I'm now going to hand over to Cameron and Ryan to take you through the next part of today's proceedings.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kevin. I'm just going to share my screen just to get the presentation up. If I can find it. I don't seem to have the option to share a presentation. I have the option to share my desktop and a whiteboard. Okay, wait, there we go. Perfect. I think I'd be used to this by now, having done it for over a year, but we got there in the end. Kevin, can you see that? Is that sharing okay?
Yeah, we can.
Thanks so much. Okay, thanks so much, folks. So myself and Ryan are going to just take you through some reflections, I suppose, that we've had over the past year or so doing or delivering the NStEP student training for class reps, some of the things that we've noticed, some of the things that we've picked up on, and some recommendations, I suppose, from the conversations that we've had with lots of different types of students over the past year or so. But to start off, we thought it might be interesting just to do our intro slides that we generally do at all of our NStEP trainings. Kevin's covered a bit of it, but just get to know us a little bit more and some of the fun facts that we put in about ourselves. So my name is Cameron. Most people will just call me Cam. 26 and my pronouns are they, them. So I studied a BSc in biotechnology and then moved into a master's in regenerative medicine. Most people, when they've met me, they don't believe I do science because I get involved in lots of clubs and societies and activism. And so most people thought that my area of study was elsewhere. As Kevin said, I've been involved in the Students' Union for a number of years. Recently, last year, as the Vice President for Education. And I'm currently studying for a PhD in electrophysiology, studying Parkinson's disease. Some fun facts about me is that I absolutely love circus skills and anything to do with the circus, juggling. If I didn't have a PhD, I probably would run away to the circus. And I also am a really passionate fencer, not the kind that you have in the garden, the kind that you have for sword fighting. But you can see in the middle there, a picture of me in a hospital bed, and that's because although I like both of those things, I'm incredibly accident prone. And end up injuring myself quite a bit, which most people who know me also know about. So I'll hand you over to Ryan then to introduce himself.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Ryan. You can see that there. I have a whole just bunch of crap here. You can see it's very hard to summarize yourself on side, so I'm going to rush through it as quick as I can. So you can see down the bottom, I'm from Meath. I don't have a whole lot more to say about that. It's just Meath. It's nothing very special about it. But on the right, you can see is the oldest building. Anybody who goes to Maynooth or has been there has probably seen it. It is the building that stands out the most from the others because they just decided to go with a completely new style to just make sure it didn't fit in, and us computer science students stood out as like they're a little different. But I have that there because that is where I have spent so much of my time because my hobbies include like making games as well as just studying computer science. So I tend to be in that building in all of my spare time when it was open. I go to Maynooth University, so the crest is there in the middle of the page. Just picture me in case I'm not pinned there for you. I have an Oracle and SAP down at the bottom because I'd always tell the students this year that that's where I'd spent the last year and a half of my life. I was working for Oracle as a digital advocate, and so we're making real cool things with tech and sharing them out just to show what could be done so that people could kind of get inspired from it. And then I moved to SAP for 6 months and I worked at their marketing campaign for artificial intelligence and business intelligence. I worked there, so it was relevant at the time when we were doing the trainings, because like it's where I had just been after doing 2 years of college. I took a year out to do those. At the top, I have 1917. The reason I have that there is I'm a huge movie buff. I love movies, and that is one of the last movies I saw in cinema, and I'm fairly okay with that because it was gorgeous to watch. I watched it since it just came out on I think it was Prime Video or something, but it's just absolutely beautiful. The cinematography is amazing. There's one scene where he's just lit up by only the fire in front of him, and it just had to be there. And then the little pirate logo is there because that's my fun fact about myself, is I'm actually blind in my right eye, and so it's just there, and I like to leave it to the end to make people wonder why it's in the slide. But yeah, that's me.
I suppose folks, we're just putting that in because we want you to kind of understand how we, I suppose, try and adapt or break down that power dynamic as we go into trainings. And sometimes as a trainer, you come in and students are afraid to talk, or they have this idea that you're, I suppose, better or more responsible or whatever in that session. So we're trying to just tell them that we're general students that are just passionate about making sure that they have their voice heard. So we put in some fun facts about ourselves, some of the things that we've done and some of the things that we're studying, just so they can kind of get an idea of who we are and maybe relate to us in some cases. So then in terms of what have we done this year? So the NStEP training program was surpassed other years. And I suppose being online has definitely helped that for us. There's definitely been some challenges, and we'll talk about those, but being online has allowed us to reach a lot more students. So we have 110 student engagement recognition awards for academic representatives this year. 1,505 class reps from 24 of our participating institutions completed the introductory classroom training, which is an increase of 159% from the previous year. And 103 introductory training sessions were delivered, and again, 150% increase in the training capacity from the previous academic year. So Ryan, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, so as you can see there, we have 90 students that participated in the 8 pilot representing diversity training sessions, which was a fantastic addition to NStEP's kind of lineup of sessions this year. I believe Warren, who headed it, is here on this call, so congratulations. It was a huge success, the pilot of it. So we're very proud to have that as part of NStEP. 95 students participated in 4 bespoke training sessions, which include 2 briefings to support students participating in online institutional reviews in partnership with QQI. It's a very long sentence, I know, but it's great to actually see that people are staying involved in the much heavier stuff and the stuff that's not quite as catchy, and people are interested in getting heavier involved. And so it's been great to see so many people do that this year. There was 109 students who completed at least one online self-study training module on the NStEP website this year. And there's a heavier push for those coming even more as they're being developed, but they're really good to see because it's another indicator of like, this isn't just a session you have to go to when you're a class rep. This is something that you go and do because you're interested in it. So it's another great success for us to see so many people actively engaging with that.
For sure. And I suppose that the numbers that we're talking about here represent a really diverse cohort of students that have engaged over the past year with us in lots of different disciplines and lots of different institutions and at lots of different levels, from first year right up to PhD students. So lots of different experiences that I suppose we have the opportunity and I suppose the privilege to be a part of and to shape some of the student voice or student engagement this year. And so we both just kind of put together 2 slides of reflections of the different training sessions that we completed and the different conversations that we had with those students. And as I said at the end, some recommendations. So the first one I have here is around diversity, inclusion and equality considerations. And I suppose over the past year with this huge rush and huge move to online learning, a lot more conversations around accessibility, around inclusion, around diversity came up. And I suppose it wasn't always positive. We had students who would come to sessions and talk about how their course content was inaccessible, how they were getting nowhere with lecturers to make that accessible, how exams and assessments have become much stricter and much more, I suppose, barrier focused than it was on ensuring that students understood the content. But also that it highlighted very heavily, I suppose, the different types of, when we had conversations around what type of readings were put onto courses, what type of examples were used, what type of folks, I suppose, were represented at a course content level. A lot of folks would have reported back at sessions that they didn't always see themselves in the course content that was being delivered. And that was highlighted as a huge problem because not only had they been, I suppose, thrusted into this online world where everyone was siloed off into their own bedroom and being othered in that sense, then the course content was either, very white or very straight or very cis or very, I suppose, able-bodied, and folks didn't feel that their own identities or their own experiences were being reflected, and didn't feel like didn't understand maybe how they could engage with that content. And then from a purely, I suppose, accessibility point of view, moving online had lots of considerations for students with disabilities and students with additional needs, one of which I suppose looking at students who are deaf. It took quite a while for closed captioning to be a thing that a lot of people took on board as something that needed to be done in pre-recorded lectures. And it's still not perfect, and you still have folks who won't use closed captioning or who won't make things accessible to students. And so lots of those conversations have started. So the next one around postgraduate students, and myself and a few of the other postgraduates would have trained, particularly mostly master's students, but some PhD students. And I suppose I've written here a hidden group, and it's hugely, I suppose, accurate in the sense that a lot of postgraduate students have bared a lot of burden over the last year and a half in terms of taking on additional teaching needs, taking on additional supervision needs, but also being incredibly isolated and I suppose siloed off from other, I suppose, types of students. If I give NUI as an example, I suppose there's not a huge amount of times in all student emails that postgraduate students are even mentioned. And so there's lots of struggles that postgraduate students are having around working conditions, fair pay, around access to resources, around supports, around socialization within the institution. Lots of postgraduate students starting in a new institution in a new country with very little supports. And that's what would have been fed back to us, that they were, I suppose, taking a huge jump in their education. But whilst that was also happening, they were taking a huge jump, I suppose, in either coming to a new country, learning a new language, being in a new place, taking on additional work needs or taking on additional roles, and not necessarily getting the supports for that, and not necessarily getting any clarity around, I suppose, their role in the institution. Then there's some practical considerations, continuous assessment, exams, lecture structures, timetables. Lots of academics moved to the idea of giving students continuous assessments as a way of avoiding taking lots of online exams, but then failed to, I suppose, understand when all the continuous assessments were due. And so we had students coming into us and they had 12 or 15 deadlines in 1 week, which isn't sustainable for any type of student at any level of university or college life. And I suppose that's an example of how things were being put in place to support students, but didn't quite fully make the mark because there was maybe not so much student partnership or student engagement in those conversations around how we were going to assess our different modules and assess our different content. But also there was some positives around skills development for students and for staff. And I suppose problem solving and troubleshooting became a huge thing that came up in some of the sessions that I talked about and some of the sessions that I took, that students were finding innovative and creative ways to solve problems that they were having, but also were developing that confidence to communicate to academics that they were having issues, they were having problems, and I suppose demanding that student-staff partnership that we talk about, and also kind of gaining digital skills that maybe we wouldn't have had before. So I suppose even though I messed up getting the presentation up first, I still did learn how to use Zoom and learn how to use Teams and learn how to do those sort of things. So we were seeing that come through, that digital skills were becoming more prevalent and more important. But then also we saw some really good examples of meaningful representation and having their voice heard, and some really good success stories where academics really took on board the need and I suppose the importance of the student voice and everything that they were doing, and the redesign of their curriculum for online learning. And I suppose we've seen some examples of best practice coming through those sessions where students were very listened to, students were, I suppose, seen as the driving force in creating this new curriculum of what worked for them. And we often said to them, tell your academics about the things that you like, because you want more of the stuff that you like and less of the stuff that isn't going so well. So make sure that when you're giving them feedback, tell them about those positives, tell them about those success stories. And we were seeing that when that was being taken on board, we saw lots of success and lots of academics taking on board of the voice of the students, but also in some cases, I suppose, coming up to a closed door and the academic not necessarily wanting to let that student voice in. And then the last thing that I kind of reflect upon is, I suppose, the unknown. We were thrusted into a huge new world of online learning where lots of things were new, lots of things didn't work, lots of things did work. But I suppose one of the things that we saw through the students coming to our sessions was that huge resilience and that huge, I suppose, passion to make it work. that I suppose was always there, but maybe was more unknown in in-person teaching. And I think students were an absolute credit to themselves this year, adapting to this whole new world, adapting to online learning, adapting to online exams. And I think that they've really shown academics how they are resilient, but also how including them in the conversation creates a lot of success for everyone around the table. So I'll hand you over to Ryan then.
Yeah, and Cameron hit on some amazing points there, and I'm gonna run on a lot of the same ones because it's our personal reflections of the year. I have a few words there: accessibility, uncomfortable, a new approach, and the opportunity for change. They all lead very much into each other. So I'm gonna go on a little bit of a ramble here, and I'll hit those throughout it. But anybody that knows me knows that I am a huge disability advocate. I have a long-term / permanent disability that was fairly crippling a few years back, and I've come to terms with it now. And anytime I've mentioned that in any of my trainings or anything like that, I get a load of questions from students who also are in the same situation, or are like, okay, how are we going to approach things this year? Because normally the unspoken standard is when you have a disability, you end up having to talk to your lecturers about it, and that is nearly always in the format of there is a class. After the class, you go up to them early on in the year, have a real quick chat about, by the way, just this is my situation, and they're like, absolutely grand, we can figure that out, or we can have a longer chat about it. But that is the easiest way to approach, is you do it in that nice little informal setting where you're just there, everybody's packing up, it's nice and quiet. Just the two of you chatting. It's much easier to approach things that way. It's a lot harder to then form an email trying to figure out what you need to put in it to ask for a meeting, to chat to them. Is like, do I need to tell them my disability now? What details do I need to tell them my accommodations? It was a very hard year for people to do that, and that came up time and time again for me. I'd say over the year I've heard that question over 100 times through NStEP, through the Access Society, through the different things that I work on. And this year has been very difficult for it. But on the other side of that, we have seen such huge steps in terms of accessibility because lectures are now recorded. So people that have issues staying, I guess, up to date on information in classes are able to go back and check those. People that might have hospital appointments can now see their classes if they can't be alive. There's been closed captioning available for students now that weren't available in in-person classes. So there's huge steps forward in accessibility. And part of why I have uncomfortable there is because the hardest part about that was going to someone and say, this isn't working. I don't know what to do here. Can we figure something out? And this year was very uncomfortable for that. And it was very uncomfortable for every academic rep separately to that, just to find these new approaches to go to a lecture, to start a conversation, to work out what needs to be done and what can be done in this entirely new setting. And the reason I have that last point there is the opportunity for change is because everything this year has been new. There used to be so much difficulty working with lecturers and staff, not everyone, but a lot of them, because they have their set way of teaching, they have their set way of delivering a class. And it was so hard to move them from that because they're like, this has worked for me every year, I'm going to do that. But this year has been the best year we've ever had for pushing for change, because they can't say this is the way we've always done it because no one has done it this way before. Everything had to change. And so we were able to get our foot in the door and say, let's change it a little bit in this direction more than the direction you thought maybe. Because they had to change it anyway, we were able to get a say in how it was being changed. And we're still getting that opportunity now. And it's something I really think we need to push for more this year.
Absolutely, Ryan. And I suppose, as I said, we've come up with, I suppose, 6 different recommendations that we think are important to consider going forward for, I suppose, after the reflections that we've had on the training sessions that we've done and the interactions we've had this year. I suppose the first one here is meaningful student-staff partnership can lead to success for everyone. So sometimes, and we said it earlier, that the student representatives or the student partnership on projects can often be tokenistic and tick a box and say, we've got a student representative here, so we're doing well. But what we saw worked well was, having every couple of weeks a meeting with your set of class reps from your course to sit down and say, look, what's actually going well and what's going wrong? How can we fix this? Being open and willing to change our culture and our habits of how we do things, and listening to the student feedback and the student voice on that. And that's all leading to genuine and meaningful student-staff partnership and moving away from this tokenistic model. And what we were seeing back from students then was that both the academic and the students involved in those courses were having a better time because people were more willing to engage with the content. People were more willing to, I suppose, have conversations about the content. So the academic was getting the learning outcomes across in a much better way, but the students felt that they could actually engage and come to it. I suppose that idea of bringing their whole self to the class, as opposed to maybe going and not really engaging because it's not really working. The second one I have here is reflect on the assessment aspects of your modules, and is there anything that you can change? And do you have a genuine rationale for all the types of assessment that you're doing? And does it truly reflect the student learning outcomes that you've set? So I know sometimes we have this idea as academics that we have to have an end of semester exam to test the students to see what they've learned over the last 12 weeks. But is that a truly good rationale to follow? And does that actually tell us anything about what a student has learned? And I'll give you an example of a statistics course that I took this year, where we did 6 assessments across the 12 weeks of the module. The first 2 consisted of uploading a certificate of completing an online course, and the second was doing basic, I suppose, manipulation of a Word document to make sure that everyone had the technical skills that they needed, and getting support if they didn't. And as we were moving throughout the course, the academic said towards the end, why would I need to assess you in an end of semester exam when I can see through the continuous assessments that you've done and the project work that we've done that you're all understanding the content, and for those that aren't, are getting additional supports. And he flipped, I suppose, the idea of assessment on its head and saying, I'm not assessing you to test to see whether you've learned it or not. I'm assessing you to understand who needs more support and who needs to have more help, or what areas of the course am I not teaching, I suppose, to a standard that people understand it. And when we look at assessment from that point of view, I suppose that the argument for 100% exams, the argument for loads of assessments, the argument for ensuring that students do things in a particular set way kind of falls a little bit, and kind of loses its power and loses its rationale. And that's something that I think academics need to consider as we move back to, I suppose, what's going to be next year of a hybrid of online and in-person teaching. What assessment do we actually need, and why are we doing it? And the last point that I'll talk about before I hand you over to Ryan for the last 3 recommendations is just check in with your postgraduate students. It's been an incredibly tough year for all students, but postgraduate students, and I say this as a PhD student, can often feel left out of conversations, even if it's not intentional. And when we say students, sometimes we need to just ensure that we say the word postgraduate, we say the word PhD, we say the word master's in our conversations, because postgraduates don't have this, I suppose, default where they feel like they're included when you say the word students, because they've been left out of conversations for so long. And postgraduate students have done a lot to support undergraduate students over the past year in online learning by doing tutorials, by marking different lab books, by doing teaching, taking on additional work, mentoring students, supervising students in a way that they've never done before, with the same level of support, which in a lot of cases is nothing. So if you do anything, I suppose, over the next few weeks, I suppose I'm saying to the sabbatical officers as well as I suppose the academics, send an email to your postgraduate students, have a space where they can come and talk to you about their issues. Make sure you say to your incoming education officers and incoming sabbatical officers to check in with postgraduates. What do they need for the coming year? What needs to change? And how can we work together to do that? So I'll hand you over to Ryan for the last 3.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go do my last 2 first because I messed up my order. But I want to go with the point. Remember, you can only know the whole story if you ask and listen. And this is directed both at students and reps and staff, because this has been probably the hardest year that's ever been for academia, for students and for staff. And everybody is very much hitting that of, we're really struggling. They're not doing something that suits for us, or they're not doing what I'm expecting of them. That's a problem. That's and approach it that way, rather than going and saying, okay, how is this going for you? This is how it's going for us. How can we make it a bit easier for us all? Because realistically, most of the stuff that makes stuff easier for staff makes stuff easier for students too, and the other way around. It is going to go both ways, and so you need to make sure that you ask how things are going, what people are struggling with. If you're a class rep, going to staff, say, okay, what's going well from your side of it? What can we do to make that a little easier for you and for us, rather than just saying, go fix this, this style of class isn't working for us anymore. It's okay, maybe this will work for us both a little bit better. It might be slightly less work for you to have just this one conversation in the class rather than a recorded lecture. With, like, I do computer science. We've had lecturers that are trying to build light boards and everything purely to try and get across the material in a way, because they can't do it virtually just by speaking with a PowerPoint. They need a whiteboard. They're trying to find ways to do that. And what could have worked just as well was we had a class where we just sat and chat for an hour about, okay, well, this is our understanding of it. Is that right? Where we got material beforehand, and it worked so much better. It was far less work for the lecturer, far easier for the students. So you need to ask how things are going for people, and then work to listen actively and work with them to find out something to improve. And then my last point, in my head, it's about disability, but it's really about everything. It's their 2,400 minutes in a work week. So that's 40 hours a week, Monday to Friday. A chat takes 5 of those. And it's again what I was saying before about this year being the hardest one to go and talk to someone, because you feel like you need to schedule a full meeting to have this real official chat about absolutely everything. But what I realized towards the end of it was like, if I just emailed the lecturer and said, do you have 5 minutes? Can I call you real quick? I will nearly always get back, yeah, sure, or give me an hour and I'll call you, something like that. And it makes things so much easier to do, because you're not sitting there with a scheduled half-hour meeting of how am I going to film this? What do I need to bring up? It's just, hi, how are you? This is what I want to talk about. And they're like, perfect, let's go through that real quick. It's easier and more efficient for everyone to just take 5 minutes to go and do something quick like that. And it works in pretty much every aspect of this, is to sit down, have a chat for 5 minutes. If something can't be solved in that 5 minutes, if you took that time, you know what needs to be addressed, and you can go from there and make a new plan and say, all right, we know exactly where to go from here. We need a bigger meeting to brainstorm these exact things. It breaks things down so easily if you just take 5 minutes of a day to go and talk to somebody about it. And then I'm going to skip back to the other point, was take the opportunity to change. It won't come like this again for a long time. And it's like what I was talking about with the reflection. There has never been an opportunity for change in education like there is right now. And we really need to take that and run with it, to push as hard as we can to make things better for everyone, to push for improvements that we've never been able to push for before, both on the staff and the student side. We're never going to get an opportunity where there's so much change happening all at the same time. Well, hopefully we won't see another one for a very long time. So we need to grasp this one, push it in the right direction, so that when we come back from it, everything is just going to be a bit easier for everyone, and we're not having to fight for stuff anymore. We can actually just sit and chat and take this new approach that we've worked together to make, and push that as, I guess, education for the future. And so that's my biggest recommendation for the following years.
Perfect. And I think that is us. Oh, we were going to the year in one phrase. So Ryan, I don't know if you want to start. We were going to just sum up the year that we've had in a couple of sentences, but I forgot that this slide was in there. So Ryan, you go first.
My one, I guess, for this is, because I'm trying to keep it very short, is a year of firsts. That's what this has been for me. There's been so many new things to come across this year, even old things that are in a new light. It's a year of firsts in every way for me, and so that's my summary of the year.
Yeah, and I think mine's quite similar, but a different vein, is that it's a year of breaking habits. So we have a habitual way of teaching, a habitual way of learning, and I suppose this year has given us the opportunity to move away from the idea that the only way to teach is to stand in a lecture hall and give a PowerPoint presentation. So yeah, a year of breaking habits.
Perfect. A massive thank you to Cameron and to Ryan for a really insightful presentation, and also for all of their work as part of the NStEP student trainer team, and to extend that thanks to all of the NStEP student trainers who have been involved in delivering what has been such an impressive array of training over the past year, in spite of all of the obstacles, some of which Cameron and Ryan alluded to. And I think one of Ryan's final points was a really powerful point, and it was that piece around this is a one-off opportunity. It's a once-off time for us to observe what has happened over the last year, but also observe our practice prior to the pandemic, and to build a new future that is really meaningfully co-created between staff and students. So a huge thank you to Cameron and Ryan for your insights this morning.